A 1990 graduate of Goldsmiths College, London, Taylor Wood began exhibiting her photographs and film and video work in London galleries and in numerous important exhibitions throughout Europe and the U.S. during the 1990s, including Brilliant at the Walker Art Center, Manifesto One in Rotterdam, the 1998 Turner Prize exhibition, Aperto at the Venice Biennale, among others. Solo shows of her work have taken place at the Stedelijk Museum Amsterdam, the MCA in Sydney, Centre National de la Photographie Paris. Her next project is a major retrospective at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Cleveland, in 2008. Her work has been collected by major public and private collections all over the world in museums. Of course, photography is essentially a time-based medium. Stopping time, the decisive moment, have lured photographers since the invention of the medium in the mid-19th century. In the 1880s, Edward Muybridge's battery of tripwire shutters captured Leland Stanford's galloping horse in grid formation and analyzed a movement unseen beforehand. The construction of the snapshot has long been read as a metaphor for instantaneity, and this is where Taylor Wood's work gains its conceptual credence. For while the technology of motor drives and digital imaging have long driven experimentation by photographers, it is how artists expand upon the visual and technological credo they've been given which takes us to new places. Taylor Wood's strongly conceptual work in film and photography weaves celebrity, history, contemporary references into confrontational yet highly evocative works, which have demonstrated a natural progression from the still image to the moving image and film. Her videos of time-lapse still life arrangements are, for me, some of the most sensual representations of her interest in how time operates in the field. I now welcome Sam Taylor Wood.
Hang on. I'll just organize myself slightly. I never plan lectures, which makes for a nerve-wracking experience before I start. But I somehow feel that it's a bit more fresh, and that way I also don't feel like I'm repeating everything and that you're all going to, lights go up and half of you are going to be asleep. So I'm going to sort of freeform my way through it a little bit. I've also not brought a huge amount of slides because, again, I think I've brought a sort of good selection which pinpoints different areas that I've been working in and different themes I've dealt with, and also hopefully it will leave you wanting more. So I'm starting with this piece because it's good to start at the beginning, and this piece was really the piece that sort of launched me as an artist, and also the first time I really made a work which felt like it was me and what I was thinking and what I was feeling, and not what I was thinking I should be showing and should be thinking. Because, you know, in the environment that I sort of almost grew up in as an artist was, you know, a very exciting one. It was the beginning of what everyone calls the YBA, which was the Young British Artists, which we now call the MABAs, the Middle-Aged British Artists, as we all travel on through our lives. But this piece, I'm afraid, you know, you're only seeing a sort of 1% of its capacity as what it is as an artwork. This is a film installation of which you're seeing two parts of a four-part. I'll just show you the next part if I can do this correctly. So I'll explain a little bit to you. When I left college, I decided I didn't want to be an artist for a little while. I found the environment of Goldsmiths quite an oppressive one. It was an environment where Damien Hirst and Gary Hume and Sarah Lucas and all these sort of, you know, now sort of internationally known artists were all, you know, they were all surging on in their career. Their career had already taken off and they were still at college. So it was intimidating and nerve-wracking, and I didn't feel ready that my ideas and my creative process was that formed. So I decided that I would go and get a job and just think about things for a while before I was ready. Or I wasn't even sure if I wanted to be an artist. I wasn't sure really what I wanted to do. And so I took a job as a dresser at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden. And for whatever reason, they hired me into the men's wardrobe for the first time. I was a woman dressing and undressing these sort of big male opera singers, and which was entertaining for both of us, especially when it was Pavarotti, bless him. So what the experience was that wherever you were in the opera house, music was tannoyed through. So you always knew when you had to be at the side of the stage for a rehearsal to change a costume for somebody or whatever, or if you were a singer to hear your cue. So we would arrive there at 8 a.m. in the morning, we'd leave there at midnight. So it was a really intensive day. And we'd have to get all the costumes ready, and the music would just be played from that beginning of that day at 8 a.m., and you'd still be hearing it finishing, at 11. And it was the most magical experience, because if you imagine that you're working in this environment where Wagner's playing one day and Puccini's playing the next day, and what happens is you're hearing, one day is sort of part of Wagner's ring cycle, and you're carrying costumes down the corridor, and you're sort of walking like this. And then the next day you're hearing Madame Butterfly, and you're sort of walking a bit like this. And so you had this constant different mood changes depending on the music. And, even when you went to pee in the bathroom, you'd pee with different fervor according to what music was playing. And they had the music playing through in the bathrooms as well, in case, you're going to miss your cue if you're hanging around there too long. So everything had this sense of importance. And this was the first time I realized really how a kind of collision of what I was experiencing and what my thoughts were could actually start to come into making art. It took a little longer until I had then the confidence in myself to believe that the world should see what I was doing. So this was really the first piece where, I tend to talk a lot, but this is the first piece which was this collision of events. So what you're seeing is, and I had a bar job as well as the opera house job, and these four people worked in the bar with me, and I made them all learn a Strauss opera. They all had to learn in German the words to this opera, Electra. And then they each had their separate characters in the opera. So it was an opera with four main characters, and each one learned a different character. And then when you walked into the gallery, you heard this incredible opera music, and you saw these four loafers sitting around smoking cigarettes and drinking tea. But what they would do then was suddenly you'd hear someone start singing, and the guy here would start lip-syncing perfectly to that piece of music. So you'd see them singing along whilst they're drinking their tea and having a cigarette and just sort of sitting around at home. So it was like this sudden sort of collision of absolute sort of boredom and tedium with this complete high-octane music. So in a way, it was like giving sense and purpose to very simple and basic things in life. But as you say, I mean, I'm having to explain it and you're not really seeing it, so there we go. I'm skipping quite far forward now because it's a way of kind of showing you a little bit how my life collides with my work. And the next piece I'm going to show you is, for me, quite an intense piece, and it takes you down quite a sort of dark road. But this piece is called Self-Portrait as a Tree. And this piece came out of a very intense period of my life. I'm terrible with, I make work about time and concepts of time, but I have no concept of time. I made this a few years ago. I was really sick. I had cancer twice. I had it in 1997, and then just after I got nominated for some big prize at the Venice Biennale, I just had my daughter. So it was a monumental year. I'd had my daughter. I had the most promising young artist at the Venice Biennale prize. I got married, and then I got hit with cancer pretty heavy, and then I got it again a few years later. But hopefully that's it, because it's overrated. But this piece kind of came out of that whole period. I was going through chemotherapy. I was pretty rough. I was ill, and I was staying up in Yorkshire in the north of England, and everything kind of felt quite bleak and difficult and dark. And the last thing on my mind really was making work and making artwork and being part of the sort of young British artist scene. I was well out of it. And I took photographs, but I didn't really look at what I was doing, and I didn't concentrate or think about it. And this photograph really, in one way or another, just seemed to sort of sum up the mood or how I was feeling at that time, because it was very dark, as you can see, sort of thunderous sky, and the ground was dark, and then in a moment, the sort of clouds slightly parted, and this beam of light just hit this tree. And I happened to have my camera at the time, and I took this photograph, and then I didn't look at it again until 6 months later. And when I went back over the pictures that I took at that time, this one sort of really perfectly sort of represented how I was feeling in a way, because I always sort of had the optimism I was going to come through it, but not really knowing how. And when I looked at this, I just thought, well, that's it, sort of self-portrait as a tree. And what's really beautiful about the photograph, which I don't think you can see so clearly, you might be able to see a sort of red dot, but there's a single poppy there as well. So yeah, sometimes, you know, these things just happen. And then the next one was sort of in an answer to someone who said to me, God, you know, you're going through this intense illness. I wonder what artwork you're going to make about it. And I thought, well, you know, if I survive it, that's great. And if I make art about it, it's something else. But this was my kind of jokey answer to it, because the second time I had, the photograph you first saw was from when I first had cancer. This is the second hit I got, and I had breast cancer. And so this I made after that. It's called Self-Portrait in a Single-Breasted Suit with Hair, because I was sort of proud that I still had some hair left at the end of the experience. So it's funny because a lot of people read all these sort of Renaissance references into it, and it's really just me being silly. Although I like it a lot. So that's that. And this is another. I've used quite a lot of self-portraits to show you today, which isn't the bulk of my work, but I kind of use them as like almost punctuation points throughout my career, because it's like a way of just sort of stopping and involving yourself and sort of, I don't know, checking where you are in life. I made a video I've made 2 music videos in my life, and that's probably all I will make, but I made the first one was for Elton John's song I Want Love, which I can put on right at the end if you really want to see it, but it's just basically this film of him wandering around this empty house, and he's lip syncing as if he's singing the song. So it sort of referenced a lot of my other work, and I felt like it was, because it didn't feel too far out of the realm of my work, that it was a good thing to do. And Robert Downey he was still in rehab when I made this picture, and you can see just around his left foot he has like a tag, so we couldn't cross certain county boundaries and things like that, otherwise we'd have police cars screaming after us. But this piece was based on, I'd been to Rome and I'd seen Michelangelo's Pieta, and I thought, you know, it's an incredible sculpture, the most beautiful thing I'd seen in a long time. But I noticed that, you know, she was holding this sort of limp body, but there's these tiny little arms, these fine-boned arms, and there was no strain to hold this weight. So this is a still, really, from the film that I made, where the film is just 4 minutes long of me absolutely struggling like crazy to hold his sort of dead weight. And I said to him, you know, just give me all your weight, just let your body go. And in hindsight, because I sometimes feel that your work is 3 steps ahead of you. Maybe it's your sort of subconscious is thinking sort of faster than you. But this sort of felt like I didn't really know why I was making it. I knew I'd seen this sculpture, but in hindsight, it sort of felt like we'd both made this video at very poignant points in our time. I'd just come out of illness. He'd just come out of this, you know, intense sort of rehab stint, and we were kind of supporting each other by making this piece. So that's that. And then the film I'd like to show you, Penny, it's a film called Ascension. And I thought this film would be good to show because a lot of my work has sort of biblical references or references to sort of art historical paintings or sculptures, and this next piece, thank you, is I really hope it's the right one. Oh yes, thank you. Because there's one I really don't want you to see, which I'll explain later. Yeah, I really will explain later. But this one is called Ascension, and it's really this. Well, we'll watch it, and it's just 3-4 minutes long. It might feel like an eternity, but it's just 4 minutes long. go. Thank you. So that film, was a challenge, that film, because I'd had the idea. I was really jet-lagged and very overtired. I was in Mexico. I'd gone to see a space where I might have an exhibition, and I'd sort of dozed off in the afternoon, and I sort of almost had it like a sort of vision, if you like, and I woke up all excited, and I said to a friend of mine, I said, I've had this idea. It's an amazing idea. I think it's going to be such an incredible film. It's like, I have this idea of this man. He's like asleep, or he could look like he's dead, and there's this guy tap dancing on his chest, and there's a pigeon on his head, and this friend of mine was like, oh, you should really sleep some more. But it wouldn't go away, and I kept thinking about it, not really understanding what it was or where it came from. So I sort of pursued the idea because it wouldn't leave me, and so we had this this chest plate built so that the tap dancer could tap dance on his chest, and obviously we wouldn't sort of puncture his lungs. And the tap dancer was incredible. And I said to him, every time you think you're going into a rhythm, I want you to sort of break with that rhythm so it doesn't become too much of a sort of rhythmic dance. And then we trained that bird for 3.5 months to stay on his head. And the battle to train it was, I had someone obviously professional, I wasn't doing it myself, but he, we'd train it, it wouldn't stay on, and of course on the day of filming, it wouldn't get off. So we did the first take, and I said, just keep dancing until the bird flies, and sort of 8 minutes later, with blood dripping down from the claws that were digging in his head, and people in the wings sort of flapping their arms to try and get this bird off, and it just would not leave. Anyway, this was the second take where we managed to sort of force it to leave his head, but it sort of seemed quite happy and comfortable to be there. But the film really, I thought about it a lot, and I then sort of re-looked at a lot of old paintings and saw that, the sort of the Trinity in a sense, and that there are a lot of paintings with the sort of dove flying out of the sort of soul, if you like, flying out of the body of. Anyway, so I sort of re-looked at those paintings and realized that obviously I'd sort of seen these paintings and thought about them without sort of looking at them too closely. So there we are. Moving swiftly on, back to the slides, if you don't mind. The next piece. The next piece I made out of, I'd made these photographs. Here, let me move it on. I'd made these photographs where I'd sort of met these French gypsy kind of acrobats. And I made these photographs of them sort of in midair where you didn't see the trampoline. And I don't have those pictures here, but they were just an experiment to sort of see how these pictures would look. And I had this idea that I wanted to do a picture where you couldn't tell if someone was leaping or falling. And I made this photograph from that. And again, I sort of feel like it has this slight sort of religious element to it, but it was quite a sort of interesting photograph to make. Okay, on to the next one. Oh, that's me, I'm controlling it. Again, this was a filming sort of film, it's a photograph, based on a painting by Holbein of a dead Christ. And I wanted it to sort of look slightly androgynous, and that you couldn't sort of tell man or woman, although, I mean, you kind of can. But it's called Sleep. I didn't want him to look dead, so it's called Sleep. But also, you don't see it in this slide, but when you look at the photograph closer, there's a sort of shadow where you can see his breath. You can see there's just a sort of double image of the chest rising. You can ask me questions at the end, by the way, because sometimes I don't have a lot to say about one and a lot to say about others. Anyway, moving on to a whole other series of work. Those last two are just sort of examples of ones of photographs that I've made that are sort of based more on paintings and religious iconography. But the next series is a series that, for good and bad reasons, is one that I seem to be a bit more known for more recently, and it's also what I'm showing here in Atlanta at the moment at Jackson Fine Arts. This one is Forrest Whitaker. This was a series. I'll skip through them, and then we'll go back and I'll talk about each individually. This is a series. There's 28 photographs in total. I'm showing you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is Forrest Whitaker. This is Ed Harris. This is Daniel Craig, James Bond. Benicio del Toro and Paul Newman. And they're called The Crying Men. What I did was I had this idea that photographs of people, I mean, on many different levels, these photographs really, but one of the fundamental things I thought about is that these are the people, these are the sort of icons and heroes of our age. We sort of, we laud, we sort of hero worship, in a sense, actors and, film stars, and that these are, our icons of now. So I wanted to look at these people, and specifically men, and that they're all these people on such, we put celebrity and them on such high pedestals. And what I wanted to do was to almost show their vulnerability, to show their human side, and to sort of almost bring them down to a whole other level. So I decided that what I would do would be to make them cry, which I thought very naively at the beginning would be easy. They're actors, they can cry, surely. It wasn't actually at all easy. It took me 3 years, this project. And I didn't tell any one of them that they had to cry. So what I did was I wrote them all a letter, a standard letter. I went to, I'd lie in bed thinking, oh, God, I'd love to meet him. That would be amazing if I could. And then I'd write them on my list. But then, of course, you're faced with your heroes, and then you've got to ask them to cry. And it's like, Mr. Newman, it's so amazing to meet you, and I love Cat on Hilton Roof. And could you cry for me? So it was actually quite an uncomfortable experience because, as I said, I entered into it quite naively, and I quickly got a shock of what I was actually doing. And two, they didn't know that they had to cry. They all came along thinking they were having their portrait taken by an artist, and hey, maybe it might end up in the High Museum, or or somewhere. Somewhere important and outside their normal realm. So, I got a good response from pretty much all of them, and a bad response from a couple of others. But Forrest Whitaker was on my sort of hit list at the beginning. I really wanted to photograph him, and I really wanted him for many reasons. I really thought he was a great actor, and I still think he's a great actor. But I wrote him the first letter, and then I wrote him 5 more, and it took me 2 years of chasing him around the world, because he would respond and say, I'm going to be in New York. If you could come to New York, I'll do your photograph. And so I'd line up a few other people and try and do one trip, and then I'd always get there and he'd always have just left, or I'm coming to Europe, if you can, and he'd always just leave. So I sort of hounded him and stalked him until finally he agreed to do the photograph. And so he arrived and he said, what would you like me to do? You've been so bloody persistent. And I said, cry. And he went, I'll do anything but that. And I said, no, that's the whole point, is that you've got to cry. And he said, and I promise you it was this quick. He said, are you ready? And I had all my cameras ready for when he walked in. I said, yeah. He burst into tears and sobbed his heart out. And he was, sobbing with sort of, snot bubbles and tears streaming, I'd got sort of quite good at it, but the thing is you think, when do I stop them? Do I tell them, actually, I've got my picture, and I got it like 10 minutes ago, or do I let them just play it out because it's making them feel good? It was really difficult to sort of gauge, and then the next one, Ed Harris was. This one, actually, I think has to be my favorite because the experience was so extraordinary. He arrived again. He said, everyone said, no way, I'm not crying. I know it was, a negotiation and a battle. But he said, no, I can't do that. I've had a long day. And I said, oh, please, And he said, all right, well, I'm not going to promise anything, but I don't want anyone around because, you don't just get one person. You get the PR, the PA, the hairdresser, the makeup artist, the friends, and people come with about 8 people wherever they travel. And so he said, I don't want anyone else around. I just want you and me, and we'll go into this bathroom, which was tiny. Like, he was there, and I was here with my camera sort of up against the wall. And he sat there just like this. 10 minutes went by, 15 minutes, and I just thought, should I be taking pictures? Is this him crying? And he was just sort of looking at it. I just didn't know, so I was sort of politely taking pictures. And then he just looked sort of, it felt like through the lens into me, and tears started streaming, and he cried and cried. And I started to cry. And then he was crying, and I was crying. And I was taking pictures like this, trying to wipe and trying to keep him focused and trying to sort of wipe these tears. And then he just leant forward and he just went, "Are you okay?" So I think that has to be my favorite one, because the experience was so amazing. And I actually think I might sort of start going to the bookies with my sort of Oscar nominations, because I actually feel like I've picked Forrest Whitaker before he was up for Oscars, and then I did Philip Seymour Hoffman before he got his, and I think maybe they should all come to me to be photographed crying, and then and that was him being James Bond, and yeah, that was in my studio in London. And again, you know, every single one, it was a completely unique experience. Again, none of them wanted to cry, and some of them took a long time. Some didn't need any. Well, most of them I didn't help them cry, you know. But most of them, you know, they found their own resources. But I think what was difficult is that normally, you know, my naivety was, you're an actor, you can cry. But normally that crying is within a sort of narrative structure of a film. They're a character. And in a sense, what they were doing was crying as themselves. And I think that's why it was so difficult, I realized 3 years later. And this is my favorite story, is that Benicio del Toro was the first one. So I arrived to photograph him. No way, I'm not crying. And I said, but you've got to. The whole project is crying. No way, I'm not crying. And, you know, all kind of Latin and macho, and I don't cry. And anyway, I said, well, I thought, oh, God, I'm going to have to lie. And so I said, oh, well, it's a shame, because Paul Newman's already done it. And I knew I was going to photograph Paul Newman later. I thought, oh, please do it. But he said, oh, Paul Newman's done it. Yeah, and Ed Harris, which I had 2 days later. I said, yeah, Ed Harris. Well, they've both cried. Yeah. It's like, but, you know, if you can't do it, don't worry about it, it's fine. If you can't do it, they can. And so that's when I got a bit sneaky. So we finally got there. And there we are. And of course, I got to Paul Newman, and he was like, I haven't cried for like 30 years, there's no way. I said, okay, you're Paul Newman, just look sad, it's fine. Benicio del Toro did, but anyway. Anyway, so that series, you'll see more of them at the gallery here, and there's a book. Not that I'm trying to sell it, but there's a book of all 28 of them. And so there we are. So that's them. Shall I show you a film, or shall I just keep going? I'll keep going. This is a series this is my studio in London, and this is a series of photographs called Self-Portrait Suspended, and you don't see my face in any of them. And I started them in the morning, and it went through till nighttime. And how and why I did these, we'll start with, is I wanted to just have this sense of complete, no gravity, floating in space, and here I was in my studio, just sort of free of everything and anything. And I think, again, I got to a point where I'd stopped thinking like a sort of, like an ill person. I'd sort of moved on from it and felt like I'd left it behind, and this was my sort of sense of freedom of all those constraints that I'd been, you think very differently, and your fears and anxieties, and this was the first time I'd started to come out of that phase and sort of started to not be a victim, to be honest, and I wanted to make these because of that. And I decided I wanted to make all these create different shapes with my body. So the simple way would have been to have gotten a harness, but I didn't opt for that way. I opted for the difficult way, and because of the shapes, the harness would just really pivot you from your hips, whereas to get shapes like this, I had to have more. And so what I did was I hired a bondage expert, who then came with all his strangeness, and he was called Master Rope Knot, and you had to refer to him as Master Rope Knot. Hi, Master Rope Knot, and it was all very formal and very odd, and I had quite a few friends around at the same time. And this was the most painful one, because that was tied around my ankles, so my full weight was dropping. It was incredibly painful, and we did it through the day, so you saw the change of lights when you see there's 8 of them in the series, or it could be 7. But you see the change of light through the day, and what I wanted was that just sense of weightlessness and floating and sort of at ease, even though in reality it was incredibly painful, full of constraints, but you don't sense that. And I think, that was partly what I was feeling as well, is that you can't sort of sense the pain to get to the point where you are in life. So that's those. This piece, I think, you came in to. This was a commission. I don't do commissions, but I did for this one. What happened was the National Portrait Gallery in London, a pretty prestigious place. They said to me, we'd really like you to do a portrait of David Beckham. We don't have a great portrait of David Beckham, and we need one. And I said, no, I can't photograph him. He's the most, in Europe then, he's the most photographed person on the planet, and was in every magazine, on the cover of everything and everywhere. And I thought, how can I photograph him in a way that's going to be interesting to me, firstly, and to the world? So I said, no, I can't do that. And they said, well, if you could think of an idea. I said, I haven't got an idea. Oh, God, here comes one. Okay, I'm having an idea. But I really don't want to do it. Well, actually, the idea is quite good. I think I might film him asleep. And then I started having this idea of, this kind of powerful athlete who you see sort of racing around the field, and someone who is, everywhere at the moment, which I think you've got him now, so you can have him everywhere. But we're all tired of him. But totally omnipotent, and omnipotent, not impotent. And he, so I thought this idea of him asleep and a film of him asleep. So, just having that sort of sense again of a sort of vulnerable moment of all barriers down and asleep, and also an athlete who you see normally running around, and so the film is an hour and it's just over an hour long, and I filmed him just after he'd finished a training session, so he was completely exhausted. He came back, lay down on the bed, I turned on the camera, and then he fell asleep. And then I sat there, and after 10 minutes, I started to get bored, sort of thinking, it's like, the camera was on and it was focused on him. And I thought, oh, God, what do I do now? Because I should make sure he's asleep. So actually, when you see the film, you saw an excerpt as you were coming in, but there's a sort of quite a shiny headboard behind him. And when I rewatched the film back, and I've not pointed this out to many people, you can actually see me pottering around in the background, sort of swinging my arms and sort of folding up my cardigan and putting it in my bag and sort of wandering around, sort of sighing and wandering off again. So the film, anyway, was then shown, and I wanted it, and it was the beginning of something which has sort of come into my work quite a lot now, because I wanted it to be that you looked at it and saw it as a photograph, that you thought that's a photograph, and like a sort of backlit photograph. And actually, whilst I'm talking about this, Penny, could you put on the one that's called The Servant? So I wanted it to look like a backlit photograph. Actually, not The Servant, The Last Century. Let's do that one instead. And that when you saw this photograph, you saw that it then started to move, and then you saw that it was a film. So it really did, when you sort of first look at it, look like that. And that's sort of actually, I always think that, doing these things that they tend to always kickstart something else. They're never a waste of time. Well, I can't say that was a waste of time. It was quite a nice hour and a half. Made lots of people jealous. So this piece is called, so this came out, this was one of probably about 5 pieces I've made that came out of that. And this is called The Last Century. And these are all people I know, and they're all holding still for the length it takes for that cigarette to burn down. So my friend Susanna here on the far right, I said to her, right, I want you to smile and hold it for, I think it was like about 6 minutes. And she said that her cheeks were in pain for about 4 days afterwards. She could hardly talk from the holding that. And then the guy on the piano, it's so freaky how still he is. It's so unnerving. I've watched it so intensely to see if he even breathes. You can't even see if he breathes. But what I love about this piece is that, it's like a sort of frozen moment that you've paused, but yet you can see them moving. You can see the cigarette burning down, and you can see sort of people in their real-time, real life, just wandering up and down, and cars go past outside, so it makes the whole thing sort of quite strange. And I called it The Last Century because my husband, who's a smoker, which I hate, whenever he lights up a cigarette, I go, oh, that's so last century. And so I sort of did that as a kind of joke to him. And also because I was looking at a lot of photographs of, sort of 40s in Paris kind of photographs and bar scenes and paintings of sort of Manet paintings in bars, and I just thought that would work. Anyway, and again, this is on, and same with the Beckham piece. It's on like a sort of flat LCD, LCD screen. So, and just about this big. So again, you think it's like a sort of backlit photograph until you sort of study it a little bit longer. I won't make you sit through the whole 7 minutes, but what happens is it finishes with his fingers burning, which he really manages to masquerade. Well, you can see it in his eyes. And then it finishes when the ash just drops off. So there you are. That's that. If we go back to the slides. You see, I thought I didn't bring much stuff, but it soon takes up time. The next series of photographs, here we are, I've got to do this. As you can see, is based similarly to the last ones. This is 2 years later from the last ones. And this is called Bram Stoker's Chair, which got me on the cover of of a magazine called Dracula Monthly, which I was so excited about. I'm actually on the, what's it called? It's Dracula, it's the Dracula Society, there we are. I've sort of been initiated into the Dracula Society for using the name Bram Stoker. But when Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, the part of it was that he didn't have a shadow. And so the chair doesn't have a shadow. I took the chair out. And this piece is, it's sort of, similar, as you can see, to the other ones, except for the other ones were much more, I don't know, they had a kind of innocence and a freedom to them. These ones I feel are much darker. I think I sort of felt like what was holding me up was something I couldn't understand. What was holding me up and the sort of shadow and this sort of the sense of, I don't know, more of an abyss. Something more like something very fragile was holding me up. And what was that? And so these I sort of feel are a little bit darker. And the shapes of the shadows, these sort of weird amorphic shapes, and sort of the sense of another kind of entity, if you like, in a way. So that's my dark side. And then finally, I'm just showing you one piece which was a piece that I made very early on, which is called Wrecked. This, as you can see, is sort of loosely based on The Last Supper. And what I wanted it to be was formally based, just formally based on The Last Supper, but that if it was to be your Last Supper, maybe this would be how it is. And that it would be a little bit more, it's filled with food and wine and drink, and everyone's a bit drunk, and the woman in the middle, and I made her a woman, is kind of thrown complete abandon, and is this sort of in this other world, and has taken her top off, and yeah, that was a piece which was shown quite regularly as part of the sort of YBA. Aren't we all complete scoundrels and scandalous? So I thought that would be a good piece from that. And that's sort of roughly it. I've got loads more films, but I just sort of feel that maybe I should stop there and let you ask me questions, possibly. And maybe we could run The Servant in the background. But The Servant is the most recent work I've made. And it's the idea of this sort of very still film that looks similarly like a photograph, but it's also, I really love this piece because it just sort of feels like the most simple moment has been paused, although it's being sort of physically held. But it's not there yet. So we'll put that on, and if anyone wants to ask me, you don't have to ask me questions, but if you want to, I'm happy to answer them. Whenever I want to ask a question in a lecture, my stomach goes funny. I feel a bit sick, and then I never do. But yeah. So,
I've been reading some articles recently about art critics criticizing using celebrities in a lot of these major works, particularly Kate Moss.
yeah.
How do you feel about that? Do you prefer
Well,
celebrities?
I mean, I was quite... I had a tough time doing the Crying Men series, but I really resolutely stood by it because I felt like I was being sort of... the people, or the critics, weren't really sort of... They were reading it at face value without sort of going any deeper because, they say, oh, look, she's using all these famous actors. Well, yeah, that's the point, was that what I was trying to do was to take this sort of higher echelon of people that we, celebrate and adore, and try and sort of pull them down and make them sort of on, the same level, and sort of have a sort of humanitarian side and so, it was difficult because when you read these things, you go, oh, look, this is about something else, and of course the other thing with the Crying Men was the fact that I wanted them to, that are they faking it or is it real? Are you looking at a truth or a lie? And in order to do that, I had to use actors that, had recognizable faces so that people knew that they were actors. If I'd have photographed lots of different just men crying, it wouldn't have the same questions of authenticity in a sense. So, I mean, you have to live with what they write about you. Critics and art criticism is often interesting. I do try, I know everyone says, oh, I don't read it, but of course you do, but you sort of read it like that. It's tough sometimes reading what people write about you. It's hard when it's, now I get sort of personal attacks too. My favorite one most recently was the headline, "She uses cancer to make her more interesting," which I thought was quite savage, and that was the Times as well. So, you kind of have to take it with the good and the bad. But when it gets like that, it gets pretty brutal and upsetting. Yeah.
I'm not asking you to give away any of your techniques.
That's because I don't have any. I just do it.
But the Bram Stoker pieces, when you achieved shadow of yourself as opposed to... And was that you?
Yes.
Shadow of yourself and no shadow from the chair, as well as the acrobatic aspects of it. How is all that achieved?
Well, again, Master Rope Knot figured largely in my life. What I really liked about him was he came to an opening of the show, and I saw him standing there, talking to all these journalists, like really proudly about how he'd, what ropes and how he'd done his knots. But he, again, I sort of called him back in, and so it was, pulley systems and ropes to get me in those shapes, and it was intensely painful. In fact, I realized I'd lost quite a lot of stamina because I had to do it over 2 days instead of the one. But and then and then I had someone hold the chair, and it was sort of hammered down with at the base. But I don't use computers for anything apart from that kind of retouching, where I took out the ropes and took out the the guy holding the chair and things like that. So, and the shadow, of course, that came out in post-production too.
More questions? Yes.
Could you explain the title of this? And also, it makes me think about when you say your husband smokes, does he still smoke?
Yeah.
So is that like you kick him out in the winter and he smokes outside?
Yeah. That's not him, though. I'm torturing him endlessly. This piece is called The Servant, and it's very... titling work it either comes immediately or it doesn't, and when it doesn't, it's so difficult to try and title it. I mean, to give you an example, I just had a baby 10 months ago, and it took me 7 weeks to name her, and and I just couldn't think of the right name because no name seemed good enough for this little miracle after everything I'd been through. And it's sometimes, I know it's terrible to compare titling a work to naming your baby, but it's similar. It either comes immediately or it doesn't feel right, and it's fitting it. And this piece, the guy's a writer, and he's called James Fox, and he's always confused with James Fox, the actor in the film The Servant. So I just named it The Servants, just to completely reintroduce a whole new generation of confused people that think that is James Fox, the actor. So sometimes titling works can be almost a random thing, and sometimes they imbue more meaning, and sometimes they're descriptive. It's difficult to really describe why you title things the way you do. Yeah.
I keep feeling reminded of Andy Warhol's films, especially with the David Beckham piece, his Sleep, and his screen tests. And I was wondering if that was something that had inspired you, or if that was just by accident.
Yeah, absolutely, a huge influence. I mean, when I was studying art, originally I was studying sculpture, and in fact, my whole degree was in sculpture. And it wasn't until I left art school and then I went to work at the Opera House that I shifted and started to think much differently and in photography when I was studying sculpture, we had this tutor come in and show us all the films of Warhol over 3 days, and then there was not all the films there, but then at the cinema they were showing other Warhol films, and I had never seen anything like it, and I thought they were absolutely incredible, and I think that was a big early influence in making film and how I thought about various different things. So yeah, those films are for me the best aspects of his work, or the things I respond to most.
I'm curious about the last piece you showed. I'm not sure the title of The Last Supper.
Wrecked.
What year did you make that in? And are you familiar with Renee Cox's piece?
I made that in 1994. I'd like to think that was the first time and I was the first person, but I think Warhol did it as well. I don't know Renee Cox's piece or when that was. Was that more a recent? I don't know.
It was just a big controversy. It was at the Brooklyn Museum of Art.
I know exactly the one, yeah. I think that was more recent. It was like 2001 or something like that. But, I mean, if you look at, it seems to be quite a strong theme in artists because, obviously, as I said, Warhol used that image. And then there's another one, I can't remember who made it. There's been, and then I'd like to think it was Warhol, then me, and then about 4 others. But I'm not sure if that's strictly true.
What was the reaction to that piece? Did you show it in Britain?
It was so strange, or it is so strange, because in Britain, no one batted an eyelid. There was nothing. When I, in fact, showed that was also shown at the Brooklyn Museum. When they showed Sensation, the collection of sort of young British artists work thing. And that was shown there, and I didn't really get much of a reaction there. In New Zealand, however, I had picket lines, I had letters and radio shows calling up. I had my Auntie Jackie wrote me the most savage letter about what a terrible atheist I must be to make such a, so it was, and then it's traveled to different places, and you get a slight reaction, and then most places nothing. It's odd how different cultures or different places react differently.
Okay, thank you.
I think we'll take one more question if someone has one. Yeah.
Kenneth? No, yeah. See how good I am at remembering names.
Thanks for remembering. What was the video that you didn't want to show us, and why?
Well, what happened was, this was just a couple of years ago. I got a call from an art critic, someone I really respect his writing, and he phoned me up. He said, I'm doing this film project, and we really need a woman artist. And I thought, oh, God, what is it? And he said, no, let me tell you who's doing it first. He said, Matthew Barney is doing it, and Larry Clark. I thought, uh-oh. And then who else? It's Matthew Barney, Larry Clark, and a whole stream of people I really admired, all men. I said, what is it? Well, kind of pornography. And I said, what do you mean, kind of pornography? Well, what we want to do is to try and see how artists would deal with the theme of eroticism and the questions of pornography and what that balance is and what makes it art and what makes it pornography. And we'd like you to address that and make a film. I was like, you've got to be kidding, no way. And I said, no, I can't do it. I really can't go into that realm. Anyways, hung up. 2 days later, are you sure you can't go into that realm? Because we really, really need to see it from the perspective of a woman and how a woman would deal with that. And we think you'd be... Anyway, they were pressing all the right buttons. I said, all right, let me think about it. Anyway, I couldn't... It was so difficult to try and think of a way to address that in a way that I felt comfortable doing it, in a way where I felt like, whatever I'd make, I'd feel comfortable showing it, as you can see. When it came on, I was like, turn that off, quick! So I'm not that comfortable showing it, although it's out on DVD. Anyway, it was so difficult. And then what happened was it went to the Sundance Film Festival, and it got an incredible response and very positive as well from all the films that were made. And I went up and I had to give a little talk about it, and I realized that when you enter the realms of pornography, everything you say becomes a double entendre. Everything you say suddenly. So I said, when I came onto this project, I found it very hard. It was so anyway, and everything I said, I thought, oh, I can't say things like that. So what I did, I decided that the way, and also the other thing is, with pornography and films, I thought if anyone comes to see my film as a pornographic film, they're going to be sorely disappointed. If anyone comes to see my film as an art film, they're going to say that is pornography. So it was actually really interesting to do. But and what I did was I thought I'd make it as beautiful as possible and as sort of widescreen, and I filmed this poor guy basically walking through Death Valley in July. And he's walking, and for whatever reason, he takes his clothes off and then just starts to sort of fall to his knees and masturbate into the dust. And anyway, filming, I've used the same cinematographer for nearly everything I've made. And he's incredible. He's gone on. He made The Hours. He's just made Atonement. He made the World Trade Center Oliver Stone film. He's an incredible cinematographer. And here he was in sort of 50 degrees, filming this guy jerking off, and he was looking through the camera, and I just saw this one eye look at me, and then sort of look back again, and And then I saw his whole body, like, he was laughing and trying not to laugh. And of course, then I got the guilt, and we were like two school children. And also this poor guy, he was a professional. And the whole process of it was, the casting was just horrible. I got sent all these casting tapes of these naked men sort of standing there, just kind of, like, here I am, and they couldn't see me. I was watching them, but that one guy, and he was aroused, and he was standing there going, "I'd like to meet this director." And I was thinking, oh. Anyway, and then I met 4 people, and sort of very sort of prudish in English, asking them the most painful questions for me to ask them, and two of them were really scary. And then the guy I basically picked because he was the most straightforward, normal, and I'm just doing a job, and there we are. So anyway, we arrive on set. It's 50 degrees. It's so hot that we can only literally film for 10 minutes and run back into an air-conditioned hut, and then come out 10 minutes and go back in. And anyway, so this guy, it was so painfully hot. He wasn't getting very excited, let's say. And I had this girl that I didn't know very well who was producing it for me in LA, and she was a proper film producer. She wasn't a pornographer. And I kept saying to him, "Okay, so now I'd like you," and he had a walkie-talkie, so hidden behind a rock, so that I could count him down and try and explain what I wanted. And so I'd have this walkie-talkie, and I'd say, "Okay, now fall to your knees," and he'd fall to his knees, and now do what you do, And and this girl was she just took it off. "Give it here, for God's sake, the poor guy." "All right, baby." "I want you to." And Seamus, the cinematographer, and I were just like this. "Oh God!" And then she got very explicit, which I'm not going to do. But she was just really going into real details of what she wanted to do to him and him to her, and vice versa, and da 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 da. And then she was like, "There you go. That was your job, not mine." I was like, "Thank you." Anyway, when we were setting it up to show these films, I wasn't looking, and people were just beginning to come in, and I suddenly looked up on the screen, and there was this guy jacking his eyes. No, that's not what I want people to see as their first impression of my work. Anyway, if anyone wants to stay behind, I'm happy to put it on.
And I also hope that you'll pick up a festival guide on your way out and join us at some of the other events throughout October. And just to thank Sam for traveling over to the States and to Atlanta and for joining us here.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.